All right, so today the title is called Unbelievable Kindness. It's kind of like going from what I preached 2 weeks ago. Last 2 weeks ago, I preached about the gospel, how the gospel should be center of your life. And today we see what happens when the gospel is center of your life. Because we see in the King David's life, yes, during the King David's time, he didn't know Jesus because Jesus wasn't there yet physically. But we see the unbelievable kindness that God shows to the people. Have you ever seen people's reaction when they receive unbelievable kindness? Maybe you've seen it in TV and you've seen it in YouTube videos when you get all this crazy amount of money from Mr. Beast, or you get your house renovated from nothing to something big. What's the reaction? Their reaction usually is they can't believe it's happening to them. It's something that they feel like they don't deserve, but now they have it, they feel so happy about it. I actually witnessed similar thing right in front of my face. What happened was, a couple years ago, I went to spend a Christmas with my friends. And then in this family, they have a tradition called Shaka Claus. During Christmas time, what they do is they have a letter, and they sign it, and they write the Christmas message to whoever they're going to, and they put the money in for however much they want. So sometimes they could put in $100, $10, or $500, however much they want. And what they do is they go around the family, they put all the money in it, and then they go to the restaurant that night on the Christmas or the Christmas Eve. So I was there with them eating dinner. And then I didn't realize what that letter was, but after everything was done, they write a tip, and on top of the tip, they give this letter to the waiter. And the waiter opened this letter, not knowing what's in it, and then at first it's the message, and then right behind the letter, it had a lot of money in it. Something that, unbelievable kindness that you see in the Christmas time when you feel like you're working because you have to get by, and then you're getting this unbelievable kindness. When I saw her face, she was light up. She was so happy and she cried. She couldn't believe she got all this money for a tip. And there was a tip on top of a tip. So it was very good kindness. We are always surprised by unusual acts of kindness because these events don't happen often. However, the Bible is actually full of these kind of stories, incredible kindness. In our passage today, we can witness the kindness greater than the story that you just heard, or the greater than any TV shows, any YouTube videos you've watched. It is in the 2 Samuel chapter 9. Let's turn our passage into 2 Samuel 9, and I'll read the whole thing. If it's up there, yes. Again, it's in NIV, but I'm reading from ESV, so just bear with me. It's 2 Samuel, all chapter 9. And David said, "Is there still anyone left of the house of the Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now there was a servant of the house of the Saul whose name was Ziba, and they called him up to David. And the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" And he said, "I am your servant." And the king said, "Is there not still someone of the house of the Saul, that I may show the kindness of God to him?" Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in his feet." The king said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "He is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lo-debar." Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lo-debar. At Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and paid homage. And David said, "Mephibosheth." And he answered, "Behold, I am your servant." And David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father, Jonathan. And I will restore to you all the land of Saul, your father, and you shall eat at my table always." And he paid homage and said, "What is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog, such as I?" Then the king called Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, "All that belonged to Saul and to all his house I have given to your master's grandson." And you and your sons and your servants shall till the land for him and shall bring in the produce that your master's grandson may have bread to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so will your servant do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table, like one of the king's sons. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who lived in Ziba's house became Mephibosheth's servants. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate always at the king's table. Now he was lame in both his feet. Before chapter 9 begins, we all see the triumphs of what King David did. There are multiple records of his victories in his wars and battles, and he defeated enemies inside and outside of his kingdom. He's at peak of his power and remembers his promise or covenant he made with his friend Jonathan. We can actually see this covenant between Jonathan and David in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 14 to 17. It says this, "But show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness as long as I live, so that I may not be killed, and do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. David remembered this kindness that he wanted to show to Saul's descendants, if there was anyone alive. One word we have to focus on in this verse, in chapter 9, verse 1, is kindness, because in this word in Hebrew means hesed. A lot of times this word can be translated as unfailing love, faithful love, steadfast love, and loving kindness. So it is more than just kindness, and it goes deeper and most of the time it is used when God is showing kindness to his people. Another thing to note is that in 1 Samuel 20:14, it writes the kindness actually used as hesed. So we see the continuation of this word hesed and also the promise David made with Jonathan, the covenant he made with. In verse 2, we don't know if King David's men took a long time to find the descendants of Saul or had a hard time finding one. They brought in a servant who used to serve the house of Saul. Now, I said that before that this is the peak of King David's power. He had all these men that he can control. So imagine, he wants to show this kindness because he made a covenant with his best friend Jonathan, and he uses all of his warriors, all of his men to try to find this one person if he's alive. And nobody can find him. So you know that whoever this person is wanted to be hidden. And then after a long search, only thing that King David's men could find was a servant named Ziba. The fact that the servant of house was hiding and they were able to find Ziba. And then there's actually very interesting that's happening in verse 2, because when David king asked him if he's Ziba, what does he say? See, he says, instead of saying, "Yes, I am Ziba," he says, "I am your servant." Why do you think Ziba was calling himself, not himself as a Ziba, but servant? Think about it. King David's enemies were King Saul's people. So what King David had to do in order to have the full power was to get rid of everybody who was loyal to King Saul. So when Ziba came to him, he probably thought, today is my last day. So in order for him to maybe to not to die or not to be executed, maybe he's lowering himself to the low and saying that he is King David's servant. This is the power dynamics that King David and Ziba has at this moment. And in verse 3, we see David repeating hesed one more time. But this time, David tells Ziba that he wants to show the kindness of God, which is hesed Elohim. And you know that here, the kindness is not just coming from the human kindness, but this kindness almost equals to what God shows to his people. And if you quickly look at the chapter 2, 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 15, it writes that, so David reigned over all Israel, and David administered justice and equity to all his people. The Bible records how David ruled over Israel. David was just and righteous. And now after hearing from David and knowing what kind of king he is, after maybe Ziba's fears is loosened up a little bit because he mentioned there is actual one descendant that's still alive of the king Saul and son of Jonathan. However, Ziba just doesn't say, yes, there is one person who's still alive. He makes sure to tell King David this, that he is lame of both his feet. And we know what happens and how the son of Jonathan got crippled in 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4. It says this, Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled, and she fled in her haste. He fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. After Saul and Jonathan died at the battlefield, the son of Jonathan's nurse fled in hurry because she was afraid that Jonathan's son might be killed or she might be killed. And why do you think Ziba mentions that son of Jonathan is crippled? It is because back then, being crippled means even if he was the only heir, he wouldn't be much threat to David. So Ziba, being loyal to Saul, making sure that King David knows that Mephibosheth is not a rival. He's nothing. He's nobody. He's crippled. He can't do anything. He can fight in the battlefield. He can rule. He doesn't do anything. That's why Ziba keep mentioning that he is crippled. And another thing that we see about Mephibosheth is that he doesn't even have his own land. He doesn't even have his own house. He says this, we know that he has crippled and he has no home. And it says that he is at the city called Lo Debar. Debar usually means word in Hebrew. And Lo is a prefix that is used as a negator. So what that means is negator is means no. And Debar meant word. So he's at a city called no word or nothing. So look at this, the son of Jonathan, who's supposed to be the heir of his kingdom, doesn't have a home. He's even at the city called nothing, and he's crippled in his both feet. He doesn't have anything. And in verses 5 through 6, after finding the last descendants of Saul, David tells his men to bring him and finally meets the descendants of Saul. In verse 6, we finally hear the name of the son of Jonathan for the first time in our passage. It took 6 verses to finally hear his name, which is Mephibosheth. And now, if you think we saw all the worthlessness of Mephibosheth before, that he is lame and he doesn't have a home and he's at the city called nothing, it's not ending here. His name, Mephibosheth, the Fe means mouth, and Bosheth means shame. So his name itself is actually can be translated as mouth of shame, or one who scatters shame. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 9, verse 40, Mephibosheth's name is actually recorded as Merib Baal, which means he who contends with Baal. And those of you who know, Baal is a huge idol that's been around in Israel's history. It was a false idol, false god. So you see him here. His name means mouth of shame, and another name is he who contends with the false idol and not our God. It keeps going down and down and down. It seems like there is just no more a floor for him. And if you thought this was the ending, there's more, there's a basement. That's how we see about Mephibosheth here. When Mephibosheth finally meets King David, and before David even says, "Are you Mephibosheth?" what does he do? He falls on his face and says, "Behold, I am your servant." Verse 6 truly shows who has all the power and who has nothing. Mephibosheth is seen as worthless, and where no one would question David if David were to harm Mephibosheth or kill him. because that was the right thing to do at that time. In verse 7, we see David doing something that no one would ever imagine to do. He first tells Mephibosheth not to fear, and Mephibosheth probably believed that the day he saw David was the last day for him. David took this fear away from him and that he won't die not only on that day or in the future by David. And David does something unthinkable and countercultural move. David gives back all the land and everything that belonged to Saul, restoring Mephibosheth's house, and he invites Mephibosheth to the king's table, which only the closest member of the king was allowed to eat, or his sons. This was a very unusual act. This could have been seen as a sign of David's weakness to the other kings. Because David just let his enemy live and gave it everything that he took away. And he could have strengthened his kingship a little more by getting rid of his rival, but he did not do that. Why did David do this? Because of the covenant that he made with his best friend Jonathan. He showed this hesed, kindness, which we see for the third time in our passage, the word hesed. In verse 8, Mephibosheth, after hearing these words, is shocked and cannot believe that this is happening. He even asked David why he is going such a length to show hesed, kindness to him. We can see from Mephibosheth himself that he is in disbelief, that he compares himself as dead dog. Now, if you think about a dog, we say it's a man's best friend. Or I have a dog for myself. His name is Bobo. He's a golden retriever. I love him to death. So if you have seen pictures of him before, you know how lovely he is. I don't have it, but just think of this, the most beautiful golden retriever ever. That's my dog, Bobo. So you see, now in our time, when we think of a dog, it's something precious, something you almost see as the same family. But back then, in Israel's time, dog was not clean. They only used for hunting, or they only used for something else. The dog was at the bottom totem pole. It doesn't have much worth in it. But what Mephibosheth here said was, he's even worthless than dead dog, or he's almost the same as dead dog. That is saying that if you killed him today, nobody would care, because you're just getting rid of something that there's no worth anything in it. So he even himself, Mephibosheth himself, is saying he's not worth anything. He is lowest of the low, and he's not worth all this hesed kindness that he's witnessing right now. Instead of responding Mephibosheth's question about him being a dead dog, David acts on kindness of God, and he promised to Mephibosheth that David's kindness restores not only Mephibosheth, but also his whole house and his descendants. David, knowing him being crippled, he orders Ziba to take care of his land for him. David doesn't forget to mention where Mephibosheth will be eating, which is at the king's table. In verse 11, it is repeated the third time that Mephibosheth ate at David's table. However, this time it shows what it symbolizes by eating at David's table. It says this, that Mephibosheth is being treated like a prince, like David's son. In verse 12, it mentions Mephibosheth's son's name, showing David is still keeping Jonathan's covenant. In the last verse, we see three very important things. First, it says Mephibosheth now lives in Jerusalem, meaning he is no longer living in fear. He's not from nowhere or no word. He is now in the capital of Israelites. He is in the promised land, promised city, coming from no place to a capital. It's quite a jump. And he is redeemed from his shame because of David's kindness. We also see for the fourth time, you know that in the Bible, when something is mentioned 3 times, it is very important. But what about 4 times? It's almost saying the writer of this passage could not believe what he saw or what he heard. So he's making sure that the people who's reading this know that, hey, I'm not lying. This is actually happening. It can't be real, but it is real kind of face. That's what the writer's mentioning for the fourth time, that Mephibosheth always ate at king's table. We also see, and it doesn't end with there, because it says that Mephibosheth conditioned that he was crippled, making sure that whatever Mephibosheth has now, it's not because of what he did before, because of that he's a good person or that he is strong. It shows where Mephibosheth is, show the real reality of where he is. So even though he's crippled, he's eating at the king's table and he has everything because of what? Because of the kindness that David showed. In 2 Samuel 9, it is a very beautiful passage that shows great kindness to someone who doesn't deserve it. This passage shows our relationship with God and how God shows his kindness to us. Since receiving God's kindness demands no prerequisites, eagerly receive it now. For us to be reminded of God's kindness, first, you must imitate God's kindness. You know, most of you guys now are in summer vacations. That means now you have to spend more time with your families. For some of you, it could be a good thing. For some of you, it could be, oh man, I have to spend all this time with my brother. Or, oh man, I have to spend all this time with my sister. It could be different. But what's the best way for us to show kindness of God? Or how do we imitate this kindness? First, it starts with the person right next to you. It's your summer. You're going to spend a lot of time with your family. So let's say your brother is annoying you, or your sister is annoying you. What do? You said, it's okay, I love you, I'll do anything you say. You just show that kind of kindness to your brothers and sisters, your cousins, your parents, or your wife, or your husband. This is the easiest and best way to imitate God's kindness. Now, don't use this to be like, hey, do you remember what Pastor Chiwon said at our church today? It said that you're supposed to show kindness to me, and then you ask them to do ridiculous things. But be real. Try to pause for a little bit and think about what you used to do before, but now to show the kindness to your families and your friends. And maybe this is the best time by showing kindness is by sharing the gospel. Who knows what would happen to your friends and families who doesn't know Jesus yet when they hear about the good news of him. Now, we are not worthy to receive God's kindness, just like Mephibosheth was not worthy to receive David's kindness. However, do not give in to the fear thinking you're far too gone to receive God's kindness. Because we actually see this, not even in David's life, but actually from a story of a Korean pastor. There's a pastor where he had two sons. He was at a different city, and then the city that his two sons were, what happened was there was this communist party had a riot. So they captured these two sons of this pastor. And they heard about what kind of religion they have, which is they're Christians. And then these communist party, what they did was they killed them. And after a while, the government finally found the killer who killed these two sons. And do you remember, I'm sure some of you might have heard of this story, but what happened was this pastor, whose sons were killed by this man, actually told the government not to kill him. And what he did was, he actually adopted him. Instead of letting government kill the killer, he adopted this person and loved him like one of his sons. Paul in Romans 5:10 writes this, "For if, while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by death of his Son, much more, now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life. We were enemies of God, just like how the pastor and his two sons' killer was, or David and Mephibosheth were. It was a pastor and David who reconciled their relationship by showing unusual kindness. But who reconciled our relationship with God? For us, it was through Jesus' sacrifice and God's kindness that we were saved. We were supposed to perish. We were supposed to die. We were supposed to go to hell, but God gave us life by sending Jesus Christ to us. Why do you think you sometimes feel like you're far too gone to be saved? When God's kindness can reach anyone and everyone. God sought after us when we pushed Him away. God called us when we were His enemies. God restored us through His kindness by sacrificing His only Son, Jesus Christ, on the cross. And Jesus was sacrificed on the cross because of our sins, said in Luke 22:30, that He would have us eat at His table in His kingdom. That Jesus will have us eat at His kingdom. What does it mean? We saw in David that eating at His table meant that we were like His son. So for us to eat at God's table, it means that now we are the sons and daughters of our King. Do we deserve this kindness? We don't. But do we offer anything to receive God's kindness that led to Jesus dying on the cross for us? No, we didn't offer anything. But God's kindness, again, demands no prerequisites. God's kindness is for everyone, and God's kindness is everlasting. So now, eagerly receive God's kindness. Let's pray. Heavenly Father God, I thank You for everything You did. I thank You for showing Your love and Your kindness through David's life and through this story of David and Mephibosheth. Lord, I pray that we're always able to feel this love and then never think that we are far too gone to receive this kindness and this love. In Jesus' name, amen.